The following program is presented by the Metropolitan Library Service Agency.
Hello, welcome to All About Kids, a program focusing on the interests of children and young people and some of the issues affecting them. Our guests today are Hennepin County Library Board member Milt Goldstein, who's recently been appointed a Guardian Ad Litum by the Hennepin County Courts, and Barbara Amram, a social worker in the Bloomington schools. We'll be discussing some of the issues affecting children and their families. Barbara, Milt, it's a pleasure to have you on All About Kids today, and we're going to be talking about some of the problems facing children in modern society. And Milt, you've recently been appointed by the Hennepin County Juvenile Court as a Guardian Ad Litum, which I understand is an unpaid volunteer position, and you're sort of a child advocate. Would you tell us a little bit about that, please?
Well, the Guardian Ad Litum program is in effect in about 40-some states. In some states you are licensed, in this state you are not. What they wanted, in addition to the professionals in the juvenile court system, they wanted an average citizen, a layman, who can look at the case and look at the thing a little bit differently than the professionals do. Now, I originally heard about this program. I've always been interested in social problems in children and so on. I thought this would be a good thing for me to do. I've retired about 2 years ago, and it wasn't just to kill time, but something constructive that I can do. So I joined this program. They start out by first interviewing you to accept you. Then there's 40 hours of intensive training at the Guardian office. And then you are assigned, you pick cases. To start out with, I was on 2 cases, and now I just picked up a 3rd case. We deal with children, not with the juvenile delinquents who have done anything, or been arrested or stole tires or did anything of that nature, but we are involved with the children who come from homes where they've been either physically or sexually abused, where there are drugs, where the parents have deserted them, where their kids have been abandoned, and so on. And their age ranges from brand new babies. One case I had, the child was taken from the mother at 2 days old, all the way to about, I believe, 16 or 17 years old when they go into the adult system. And our job is to get to know these children, get to see the conditions under which they live, and also to give advice to the social workers and to the court to help these children either return to their parents, be placed, or some other permanent disposition.
Barbara, you're a social worker with the Bloomington schools. Have you had any experience with this program, or?
I have, mostly in a program that I worked with for emotionally disturbed children. And in a couple of these instances, there were issues of children being removed from their homes and being placed in a foster home. And the Guardian Ad Litum helped determine, as you suggested, at a point in which a child might be able to return to the home. Another case that comes to mind was one that was a highly contested issue in which a mother was accusing the child's father of having sexually abused her, and the father was denying it. And they had some outside therapist working with the child and trying to determine whether the abuse actually took place. And there was a Guardian Ad Litum involved in that situation also. A child whose mother was mentally ill, and the child was placed out of the home, and it was felt that the child needed an advocate, and also served as a kind of liaison between the county office and the mother and the family she was with.
You're working in a suburban situation. Sometimes we think that maybe the problems aren't as severe there. What are some of the things you're seeing with the children you're working with now?
Okay. I work with the Bloomington schools, and within Bloomington we have some extremes in terms of socioeconomic status of the families. We have families receiving county assistance, and we have families who are in the a high average income level. We also have families with children who have a great many needs, and there's low income housing that's dispersed throughout the city of Bloomington, and many of those families are struggling both economically and with family problems. Not that you don't see family problems in high income families, but when you add the stress of unemployment and limited means in which to get what you need, the stress is even greater for those people.
Well, you're both real activists, both within the community and political activists. What are some of the politics that might be causing this situation? Milt, looks like you've got an answer.
Well, I don't know if politics caused the situation, but I do think that the fact that money is so tight and most of these programs are having a terrible time being funded properly, I think makes the problems even worse. For instance, these programs can probably use more social workers. They can probably use more professionals. They just doesn't have the funds for it. Now, and they are doing a great job now with what they have. And the other thing that's really affected this thing, and it's mushrooming, is the introduction of narcotics in the last couple of years, especially crack, and now there's a new one called crank. And over 90% of the cases that come to the Guardians, there is some kind of narcotics involved, and that's what makes it more difficult. And I think unless somehow the cycle is broken, it's going to get even worse. I can't see where it's going to get any better.
Long-range implications for the schools and those kinds of situations.
Yes, and I'm sorry to say that I don't think that the public has really taken a close look at what the needs of the future is going to be. We have seen it. We see more and more children that when we do social histories on them, we're finding a history of some kind of drug abuse, including alcohol abuse in families. Children who are beginning to be identified as crack babies and cocaine babies, even in the suburbs. And I don't think that people are really prepared to deal with the implications of these things are going to be. A lot of these children develop slowly and have some very special needs in terms of what their educational needs are going to be. And because they need more intensive services, these become very costly services. And I don't think we're geared up in that direction. In fact, the legislature was very tight with its distribution of funds in the human services. It put a limit on what counties can do in the way of taxing in order to raise money for human services. And as a result, funds are very limited. A program which had a very minimal amount scheduled for it, children's mental health for the state of Minnesota, in which $2.2 million had been scheduled to be funded, was reduced to $1 million. I picked up the Bloomington Sun just before I came here, and lo and behold, they somehow or other found $2.5 million to help develop the ski jump area at Bush Lake for the Olympics. And I have a hard time when I match the $1 million for children's mental health against $2.5 million for a ski jump. That doesn't seem right to me.
That was the 1990 session, and of course 1990 is going to be an election year. A lot of our elected officials are up for re-election, so their campaign promises may not hold too much in store for the future of funding some of the programs. Gloria Siegel, I know, has been a legislator that's been very interested in working on the children's mental health
Gloria
issues.
spilled that Barbara referred to.
Right.
Cut from 2.1 million to 1.2 million. And her comment was, well, I'll have to be back next year crying for more funds.
And if it hadn't been for people like Gloria, that wouldn't have even gotten as far as it did. It took her to get that rolling in the first place. It's hard to know where people's values are at this stage of the game. I've been disappointed. But I think my major concern is that if we're going to be cost conscious, then you have to think in terms of the long run. When these children grow up, and I think some of the children that you're dealing with probably, Milt, get into the system and they require incarceration, people don't ask, do we have enough money for it? They just find the money and they build more prisons and they build more mental hospitals.
This is the tragedy of what you see happening now. These children today that we are guardians for, 2, 3, 5, 6 years old, in 10 to 12 years, number one, they will be in the system. They will have some problem with the social service, police, or the authorities, and a lot of them are going to have children of their own. There is one case now I heard about, not my case, but I heard about it, where the mother had a guardian representing her, looking after her affairs, and she had a baby, so now the child has a guardian, so now there's a mother and a child both having a guardian and both going through the system. It's an absolutely ridiculous situation, and why everybody isn't up in arms excited about this, I don't understand. And I will say this, I wasn't either until I got into the program.
So your ideas have changed since you've been involved as a guardian?
I've been in it a short time, only since January this year, 1990, and it's already had a tremendous impact on me. And I learn things, I see things, and become more upset what I see, because I know these kids today will be the ones that Barbara said are going to build more prisons for later. We have to break the cycle.
So is society more interested in punitive measures later on rather than early intervention and preventative kinds of measures?
Well, sure. These 2 and 3 year olds don't bother them, but when they're 16 years old and they break into their home or hit them on the head or steal their car, this affects them, yes.
Well, Barbara, what are some of the things you do working with children in the schools? Are you involved with the families and the classroom teachers?
Well, there aren't enough of us to go around. I cover 3 buildings in Bloomington, and we do have a social worker assigned to every building, but not full-time. I work very closely with some youngsters who I see on a regular basis. I talk with teachers. I work with people in the community, children coming out of hospitals, social service people, child protection and abuse workers, and I work with families, but most of the family contacts are very limited because we just don't have the time. And I find a much greater need for some kind of, not so much counseling, but advocate. These families need advocates. They need somebody who can cut through the red tape for them, someone who can deal with the bureaucracy, somebody who can see that they're children and they get their needs met. And there aren't enough folks out there doing the job.
Are you finding demographics changing even in suburbia? Are there more English as a second language families that need even more help cutting through the bureaucracy?
Yeah, that's interesting. You should mention that. Last week we were involved in preschool screening. These are children who are going to start school in the fall of 1991. And it just so happened that it was not an equal distribution, but 3 families whose children did not speak English came through within a half an hour span on the west side of Bloomington. And they were all different. There was a family from Afghanistan, and they spoke Persian, one that was Cambodian, and one that spoke Chinese. Yes, so these are children. The children themselves, although the parent who came with them could speak English, the children were unable to speak English. And I found myself thinking of new resources that I hadn't looked for. Was what kind of a nursery school system could these kids get into so that they could learn the language before they got into school? Well, that is another issue. For very good reason, they have tried to place low-income housing in the suburbs, so that they're not all concentrated into what becomes what people think of as a ghetto in inner city schools and inner city neighborhoods. And so the idea of placing low-income housing in the suburbs was a very fine idea philosophically. On the other hand, if they place them there without the resources that the families need, then parents have done a disservice, and children don't get what they really
I would
need.
imagine transportation could be a problem in
Very
a
big.
community like Bloomington, where there
Exactly.
is no really effective public transportation.
That's
So for
exactly right.
parents to get to schools for meetings. Or,
Exactly. Some very basic kinds of needs that people have. I mean, to the point, where food, clothing, furniture, and some of those things are things that we're being asked for in terms of what kind of resources can we come up with for them.
You're working with elementary school students right
Yes.
now, aren't you? What happens when these children go on to junior high and high school?
Well,
Does the network continue? Does the safety net hold up?
It continues, but again, it gets more complicated. We have some very large, even intermediate schools at the 5th and 6th grade level with 1,600 children in a building. It's a little harder to make sure that they're all cared for in the way that they need. Very large junior high schools. I'm talking about a district that, compared to other suburban districts, is well staffed in this area, and there are some that have no social workers really to provide some of those services.
Must be real frustrating for you as a social worker, deeply committed to helping kids. What about the burnout rate among social workers? Do you just all keep plugging along despite the lack of funding, the lack of numbers?
Oh, I guess to a large extent, we do. We never stop trying to change things. We think, as a politician I once knew said, you've got to shake it up and make it work. And so we keep shaking.
What about foster homes? Are there enough foster parents to go around?
Again, not too easy in the suburbs. More available probably in Minneapolis.
The big problem is foster homes and adoptive homes for minority children.
Yeah.
And this is a big problem. As a matter of fact, I just read in the paper this week where they appointed an advocate who her job is going to be to go out and find foster homes for minority children. It's a huge problem. There's this St. Joseph home down here in South Minneapolis, which takes in these crisis children and children who've been picked up, abandoned, and so on. And they're way over their expectations already this year, to the effect where they almost used up their budget already, and there's just nowhere else to put them. And this is run by the Catholic Charities. It isn't even a state organization. And this is one of the major problems, is foster homes for especially minority children. And they're trying to address it, but it is a big problem.
Another group for which they need foster homes, because they need specialized foster homes, are emotionally disturbed children. And these kids are not easy to handle, and the county has sought therapeutic foster homes for these children, and they're very few in number, and they need more of those.
Do those foster parents need special training?
Exactly.
In helping
yeah,
children?
and special patience. St. Joseph serves all of Hennepin County, so it's not just Minneapolis. A child from Bloomington needs a shelter to go to in an emergency, and they go to St. Joe's. In fact, the Hennepin County Commissioners, although they were very tight on the budget this year, the one institution that did receive some extra funds was St. Joseph's, and was for that reason, because they've just gone way over their budget in taking in kids in the shelter.
There again, I feel it's wrong on the part of society where they have to go to a private institution, and a place like St. Joseph looks for people to donate clothing, looks for people to donate toys, looks for people to donate money. Now, they should not have to go out begging to keep these children who really have done nothing wrong, except, unfortunately, they come from a situation which they had no control over, and they have to go out and beg for these items so that these children will have the bare necessities. This should really be the responsibility of some level of government. If it's city or state or federal, it should be someone's responsibility, and they should not have to go out and beg. Now, like I was talking to one social worker just the other day, and you're telling me Christmas time, vans drive up full of toys and full of stuff. We're overcompensating. But Christmas is only 1 month a year. What are they going to do the rest of the year? And they have more toys and more goodies at Christmas than they know what to do with, and then the rest of the year they go begging. And this is very
societal guilt.
Very
A little bit ago you were talking about the parents with who don't speak English well or maybe not have a strong educational background. Now, Barbara, you're a former member of the Hennepin County Library Board, and Milt, you're currently serving as a board member. How do you see the role of the public library fitting into all these social problems? Do you think that we have a responsibility? What can we do? One of the things I know, of course, is information. We can make information accessible. Hennepin County provides basic reading materials for people who are learning to speak English or adults who are in basic education programs. We provide literacy tapes for people who are registered for literacy programs. Do you have any other ideas on how the library can become a real social activist?
I just wonder how many of these people know what the library does. And I think if you are looking for this, if there are funds for this, and this is what the library wants to do, they have to go out and seek these people and bring them in, rather than sit back and wait for these people to come for
Well,
them.
I think several of
Now, is there a program
the
such as that?
librarians in Hennepin County are actively working,
this
for
is-
instance, with the SHAPE group or with Parent to Parent, and involved in the parenting programs, bringing parents and children into the library to provide story times and to show how they can use the library.
Well, for one thing, the library is free, which is better than most institutions these people have to deal with, and that's a real plus. But I agree with Milt that there has to be more outreach. I mean, I could see, and I remember when I was on the board when they started talking about cutting back bookmobiles, and I felt the librarians were the best social workers in the world. They were saying, but there's this pocket over in East Richfield where the families are on AFDC, and they're not going to get to the library unless we go out there with a bookmobile. And that became quite an issue. But I think that there are places like the housing projects in the cities where a bookmobile going right up to the front door would be an advantage. Distribution of information is good, but I think if you could put it out on a Nintendo, you would get the information out a lot faster, because I find that there isn't a family hardly that I see that doesn't have a Nintendo, but they may not have some of the other necessities of life. And
There's not one in my house, Barbara.
I don't have one, and I don't even know how they work.
Very often, I have very well-educated friends in Berkeley, California, who've never owned a television set, and their children, one's becoming a doctor and one's a musicologist. But, you know, low-income people look for inexpensive entertainment, and in the long run, that's inexpensive. It's cheaper than going to the movies and to Valley Fair and museums and lots of other places. And I think that we're going to have to get the information out in a way that they'll access it.
Well, the Hennepin County Library Foundation is fundraising right now, and one of the projects is a van that would visit daycare centers, family daycare homes, and some of the low-income housing projects, and a strong early childhood education component tied into that. So I think there's definitely a role for us.
Oh, I think so.
Somewhere.
Yeah.
Well,
How much do the schools, how much do you cooperate with the school?
we do a lot of cooperating with the
So
schools.
the school can tell a child where the library is.
Certainly, and our librarians go out and visit the schools on usually at least an annual basis. Librarians visit faculty meetings and talk about the services that are available, and we send materials home with children.
I was telling a school librarian the other day that what they needed was to allow families to come in and take out the books, and there was this look of horror. What?
Opens a whole new can of worms. Well, it has been a pleasure having both of you with us today on All About Kids. Thank you very much for joining us, and let's do this again.
Yeah, it's fun.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you for having us.
The Afternoon of the Elves by Janice Taylor Lisle. The afternoon Hillary first saw the elf village, she couldn't believe her eyes. "Are you sure it isn't mice?" she asked Sarah Kate, who stood beside her, thin and nervous. "The houses are small enough for mice." "No, it isn't," Sarah Kate said. "Mice don't make villages in people's backyards." Hillary got down on her hands and knees to look more closely. She counted the tiny houses. There were 9. Each made of sticks bound delicately together with bits of string and wire. "And there's a well," she whispered, "with a bucket that winds down on a string to pull the water out." "Not a bucket, a bottle cap," snorted Sarah Kate, twitching her long, shaggy hair away from her face. She was 11, 2 years older than Hillary, and she had never spoken to the younger girl before. She had hardly even looked at her. "Can I try drawing some water?" Hillary asked. Sarah Kate said, "No." Hillary is an average 9-year-old with a stable home, a neat yard, and concerned parents. She and her friends giggle among themselves about Sarah Kate, who is untidy, unclean, and always in combat boots. Hillary would never have considered associating with Sarah Kate had it not been for the elf village. She's fascinated by this magical spot and drawn from her orderly yard and orderly life, despite the strong disapproval of her parents and best friends. Through skillful and expert writing, the reader is led to wonder with Hillary, is this real or make-believe? Are the inhabitants elves? Is Sarah Kate using Hillary, or is she an elf herself? When Sarah Kate does not appear for several days, Hillary ventures into the ramshackle house and discovers Sarah Kate's terrible secret. She is trying to take care of her mentally ill mother and maintain a semblance of a normal life so no one will investigate the situation. Hillary tries to help, but such help is far beyond her ability. The author has handled the combination of imagination and stark reality with great skill. One reviewer compared her style with that of Paula Fox, who also wrote about a miniature village in the midst of a difficult truth. This is an exquisite book, a simple adventure on the surface, but exceedingly complex beneath. As Sarah Kate said to Hillary, "It isn't where you look for elves so much as how you look. You've got to train yourself to notice details. You just can't stomp around the place expecting to be shown things. Go slowly and quietly and look deep." Good advice for us all. This book received glowing reviews, was a 1990 Newbery Honor Book, and would be of interest to grades 4 to 6.
Afternoon of the Elves by Janice Taylor Lisle, reviewed by Phyllis Mattill, Penn Lake Community Library. Thanks for joining us on All About Kids. Please tune in again.
This has been a presentation of Hennepin County Library in conjunction with the Twin Cities Metropolitan Library Service Agency. We thank you for watching, and we hope you visit your public library often.